Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Real Stuff podcast. Today's guest is an audience caller named Makayla who is calling in to share a very crazy story with us. You may have seen we put out the call on social media for crazy, wild life stories, and we're really just trying to source together some of the most outlandish stories that have ever happened to people. Think when a friend calls you and tells you a story and you just can't wrap your brain around it. And the first thought is, I have to go tell someone else about this because it's too crazy. I just need to talk about it. Those are the kind of stories that we want to tell here on the Real Stuff podcast. So if you have one of those stories, or if you have a friend who has one of those stories and you want to share it, make it public and feel that human connection about it, please go to luciefink.com/apply and drop your information. We would love to hear from you. This story ends with one of the most dramatic, unexpected events that I've ever heard on this show, definitely, but kind of in my life. And what I love about this particular conversation is how we dive into Makayla's experience with this particular relationship and then also her general takeaway about relationships like this. And I don't think this is going to give away too much, but spoiler alert, this is about a relationship with a major age gap and how this has impacted her nearly a decade later. We also have a very interesting conversation at the end of this episode about why Makayla decided to write into the show and why she decided to come on, what she's hoping to get out of sharing this story, and how she kind of hopes that this story and this podcast episode gets back to the person that she's talking about so that he can hear it. And I just thought that was so interesting. We really dive into that on a deeper level. I'm curious all of your thoughts on relationships with age gaps. Please share any of your comments down below on YouTube if you're watching the video version, or feel free to drop us a line on Instagram at The Real Stuff Pod. Don't forget to follow us over there. We have a thriving Instagram page that's growing every single day, and I'm so excited to dive into today's episode with Makayla. Makayla, welcome to The Real Stuff. How are you doing?
I'm good. I'm so grateful to be here. Thank you again.
Thank you so much for writing in. I think the best way for you to tell the story is to kind of just dive in, and I will jump in with questions along the way so that we can make it more of a dialogue.
Perfect. Okay, so it really was a wild story. I always feel bad if I'm like, I'm sharing it with people and I'm sure they're like, oh, sweetie. But I pretty much was 17 years old and I had moved from Texas, which is where I am now, and we moved to Illinois. So I was in Chicago and I was starting school there as a junior in high school. I met my very first boyfriend ever, and it was just like the sweetest relationship. But I'd also, soon after moving, started working at a theater. So I'd worked at AMC and I met all of the most incredible people and just like acquaintances turned friends there. But I also met this one guy, and he was much older and he was the funniest person I've ever met. And so I'm dating my partner that I just was so in love with, but I also was having like the best time getting to know the person that I ended up getting into a relationship with. So probably 8 months after dating my first boyfriend, we did break up. And I'd gotten so close to that guy at the theater that we kind of waited for a couple weeks and then we started dating. And the one thing that I'm always sharing, like I'm more comfortable sharing it now than when it was happening with people, but he was very open. And so he told me probably a couple weeks after starting the job that he was 27, I was 17, and he was 27. He had a felony on his record. He had a child, and he was just always sharing so much about his child. So I felt like I could trust him. I felt like I really knew him. And because he was funny and attractive, it was like easy money for me to want to date him. And I didn't have any reservations. And I have two moms, and they'd worked for the federal government. And so it was one of those things where I felt comfortable sharing my relationship with him probably like after the first week of us dating, and they were very concerned. But it started out very innocent. We would see the free movies that we could together. We would go out to eat between shifts. We would kind of stay late after work, and it just seemed like everything was okay. I also knew, because I was young, I wanted to still try and have one leg up when it came to knowing what he was doing, knowing what he wasn't doing, knowing if he was lying to me, just trying to make sure I was like staying above whatever he could do as someone who was much older than me.
I was looking into it because I wasn't familiar with the laws and the age of
True.
consent and all of this.
Yeah.
But I did find that in Illinois, the age of consent is 17 years old, provided that the person who's older isn't in a position of power over the younger one. So, a teacher, a coach, a boss. So, just to be clear, you worked with this person at AMC movie theaters, but he was not your boss, correct?
Not my boss, right.
So I guess that means this relationship is legal.
I guess so, and there wasn't a huge even with a couple of our colleagues, it wasn't like this huge ordeal, but it was kind of side-eye type of feeling from them, but yeah, very true that it was, in a sense, okay, even though there was that stark difference. Around a couple months, I'd say closer to 6 months, started receiving messages from an unknown number, and it ended up being from the mother of his child.
How old was his child?
She was like 2 to 3 years old, and
Okay.
he actually let me know that when he was in prison, he wasn't able to see his daughter being born, and so my heart went out to him, but I was so thankful to hear that he was very involved.
Can we go back to the felony charges for 1 second?
Yes, sure.
Did he give you any details about what crime he had actually committed?
I was asking. I was so nosy that I was asking, and I believed him, and then my mother's actually could find that information anyway, but he was just very detailed, so he did share a lot, and that was, like, during a friendship stage in a sense.
Are you open to telling us the level of the crime or the exact crime?
I mean, it pretty much was related to, like, marijuana charges.
Hearing that someone has a felony,
Mhm,
it sends off alarm bells, but
right.
I think it's important to remember that I don't know how others feel about this. I feel like there are levels of
There are levels.
felonies, and
Yes.
there are, at least for me personally, there are tiers of what type of charge a person has faced in the past that might be
Mhm.
something I would not think twice about, something I could look past, something that might give me pause, but I could maybe get past, and then some
Right.
other charges that are deal breakers.
Mhm.
I'm assuming for you, you were prying and you were trying to understand what the charges were because you wanted to make sure they weren't past your deal breaker line.
Yeah, very true. And yes, like once I heard him share, it's not that I don't feel that he has to take responsibility for what he did, but at the end of the day, I did not agree with the time that he got for what he was doing. And so, even when it comes to the conversation now with marijuana and it being legal in certain states, I definitely don't agree that so he was in for 2 years. And
That
so, I
is
just felt like
crazy.
that is crazy. So yeah, it was something that just blew right over me. I was like, all right, fine. You did what you did, cool. But I just felt so bad because I didn't agree with it.
So just to understand his prior relationship, it sounds like he was in jail for his daughter's first couple years of her life. So was he ever married to this woman or did they just share a child?
I don't believe they were married because that comes into play for like a little cherry on top after the story. But no, I think they were just together. And then probably she got pregnant and then what happened happened. He was away.
Do you think that your decision to date him or to be attracted to him or I don't know, any of your gravitating towards him, would
Mhm.
that have been affected based on, I guess let's call it the level of charges that he had?
Yes, I definitely would have. I have 2 moms who work for just I'll just say federal agency, right? And so where they work, I just heard so many stories and it would mean a lot to me that I'm with someone who I guess there is a moral scale for me. And so even though we do have to take responsibility for all of our actions, there would definitely have been a point where I'm like, absolutely not, in terms of someone's choice and their decisions and them doing time for those choices and decisions. And so I would have probably stayed away for certain things. I can't really think of what like an initial example would have been, but yeah, this was not the least of my worries, but this was something very like chill to me.
So your mom's work for the federal government, they're
Yeah,
able to pull up his actual charges and confirm that
yeah.
he's telling you the truth. And
Mhm.
once they know the truth, once you know the truth, what do they say in terms of giving you a blessing to go on and date him?
There was kind of like a movie like moment, and I'm sure it was something available. Like I know they can't just go in and get completely private information, but it was a moment where my mom had pages printed out with his like even just the details of where he got arrested and everything, and she just like laid it out. And then it was at the kitchen table, and she was like, "All right, kid, let's talk." And I can't remember the basis of that initial conversation, but there was always a request to like keep her or keep them involved and just in the know of what's going on. And there was even just a really emotional moment, a really difficult moment that we had where she went to the theater and she met him and we spoke in like a little private area of the theater. And everyone was crying, or maybe not him, but like we were crying. And it was a really, really like challenging moment, but it needed to happen for her. And I think it was something that I'm thankful that she did, that she still kept me very aware of like, you can't just go full force, like we know and we can pull this back if we need to. It's kind of the vibe I got from them.
Do you think that a majority of your emotions around this kind of being like a forbidden relationship and
Mhm.
your mom's feelings about you dating this person
Right.
stemmed from the fact that he was almost 10 years older than you or from the charges?
I think, the 10 years older was pretty tough. I think my moms and I disagreed only a little bit on like the charges and me not caring as much as they maybe have cared or cared a little bit about what had happened. But I feel like it was the age. Like I feel like that was really daunting and just jarring for them to hear that someone was like 10 years older. And it's not that I was completely innocent, but I just had my first boyfriend. There were a lot of firsts with that boyfriend. And so I think it was like startling to them, especially when it comes to intimacy and just the dangers of being with someone. And has a kid too. I know that was heavy for them.
And now you said that this man was so nice. I mean, the way you described him was that he was like the bubbly, vivacious, funniest guy you've ever met working at the theater. Everyone gravitates towards him and loves him. Was there any element of you entering this relationship with him that felt like because he's older, maybe you have a little bit of fear? Is there any element of his personality that is like a red flag or anything you're scared
Mhm.
about?
Definitely. I always joke that I was mean, like I was trying to be mean. So I knew that I was being soft and sweet with my first boyfriend, but there was something different when I was with him where I was, if anything, trying to break him. And I think that was because I was like, he can get you. But I also had this really weird ego situation and just a problem within myself where I was telling myself, but he can't get you because you're too mature. You know what you're doing. You're experienced, like I'm telling myself all of these things, but I still knew deep down that I had to try, and I don't like this phrase, but just like the leash kind of situation, like keep him on a leash. And so I would ask him, where are you when we weren't at our shift, or if I saw that he didn't have a shift the next day. He did have another part-time job, and so sometimes I'd ask him, where are you? He'd say, oh, at the warehouse. And I'd say, okay, send me a picture. And so I was trying to be very controlling, and I knew that it's like, this is worthy of being broken up with. Like, you are being so obnoxious and insufferable, but if anything, I think I would have been okay with that because I just wanted to make sure he knew, don't play with me. I have some kind of control. But yeah, I was very much trying to make sure that, and like you said, out of fear, that I wasn't letting him get away with lying to me, wasn't letting him get away with being where he said he wasn't. And yet it came to that he was, and he was very, very much able to lie to me.
So we will get into the ways that he lied. But just to sort of backtrack here, it sounds like you were aware that at least the way you were operating in the relationship was
Mhm.
slightly, I guess I'll call it unhealthy.
Yes.
Were there any signs in him at this point that were unhealthy or red flags?
Gosh, I ran right through that question because there really wasn't. Like, there wasn't any signs, or there weren't any signs. He was very kind, very generous, and he was very honest. And so it was really just me trying to push out whatever fears I had, because it's not that he gave me the wrong answers at work, or I didn't really catch anything in terms of dishonesty. And then his behavior, there was really nothing that he showed that I was like afraid of in terms of his character, which was so interesting.
So now where does the dishonesty come in?
It's just like everywhere. It just popcorned in everywhere, especially after the mother of his child wrote me. And he did let me know another part of his honesty was he said he had a difficult relationship with her. And so I knew that. And I never expected her to write. But when she did, she, like a random number, I don't know how she got my number, but of course it comes like, how would someone get your number? They're in someone's phone to get your number. You're like, there's no other way. And so she wrote me and she was just saying, like, stay away from him, he is ours, probably referring to her and her daughters, and just saying really cruel things like name calling, all of that. And so at first, knowing me, I was like writing her, okay, girl to girl, tell me if you're with him or if he is with you. Tell me if y'all are together. Even if you're broken up, when were you last together? I was telling her, please give me any inkling that he's been lying. And she never could. I mean, there was, of course, I don't know verbatim, but she would always just say, whatever, just leave him alone, whatever, instead of answering my question. And so at that point, I kind of just assumed, oh, she's bitter. Like, poor lady, she's bitter. She doesn't want the father of her child to be with someone, which is a bad take to have. But I kind of went with it. And essentially, we were probably at like the 6 month mark at this point, and I'd never been to his home. But one day we were actually going to his home. He needed to pick up something, and he was driving me. I hadn't even seen this woman. I'm sure I tried to look her up, but I couldn't really like get her face in my memory. And he parks, he goes inside really quickly, and then suddenly I see this like a shorter woman. She was really adorable, but she came running out. and towards the car, and then she
Running
ran
out
out
of the house.
of the house of the and it kind of like apartment style brownstones where there was like a bottom level and then like a main entrance. And so she came out of the main entrance and I'm thinking like, wow, she's hustling. And then she ended up coming over to the passenger side window and started banging on that window. And so I was in shock and I don't really know when I connected the dots because I did not recognize her at all. And of course, I connected the dots then when, my boyfriend came out and he came running out and then he got into the driver's side. And it was this, it's not funny at all. It's not something to make fun of, but she got in front of the car and he went in reverse, but she pulled a, like, oh, and she like fell backward as if he went forward and he did not. But he did look concerned. So he got out of the car and then here she is getting up quickly. Like she faked it out very well. And then she tried to get into the passenger seat. And so it was just this whole moment that I'm thinking,
With
like,
you?
yes. And she attempted to get into the car, right? And I wasn't going to try to get out. I think I was pretty stunned. And I think it's funny that I always joke that I'm like, I'm ready for danger, like this is something that I'm bored for, or just like jokes with my friends. And here I am in a dangerous situation. And I'm like, absolutely not. I'm frozen.
When she's texting you before this whole scene at the house, when she's sending you the messages, "Stay away from us," are you ever telling him, "Hey, I got these texts from your ex"?
Definitely. If anything, like showing him, or even if it's where he's not on shift, I'm screenshotting and sending it to him. And even at one point, I tell him, like, can you please take care of this? At that point, because she would keep writing until I finally blocked her. Every number, every Facebook account she created to write me, like, just was never ending.
And was he playing along with the "she's bitter" narrative?
In a sense. And so I'm pretty sure he was just saying, like, look, she's going through a lot or something. But I did have that feeling like, okay, she's going through it. He never admitted they had been together. I even asked him, she's just not telling me. So you tell me, what's wrong with her? Why is she writing me? So he never admitted to anything, but he wasn't cruel about it. He wasn't saying anything too like damaging about her.
So before we get into what happens outside of this brownstone, why was she inside?
Right. And come to find out, they were very much living together. That was like the biggest lie. So that was the biggest lie of all was he lived there. And of course, every time I got a picture or very few FaceTime calls we had, it must have been when she was out because that was her home. And so that was like the worst thing to, of course, find out, or me thinking like, if you're telling me you're driving us to your home to get your wallet or whatever he had to get, then clearly why is she there? And his story initially was that she was watching their daughter, but that wasn't the truth.
I'm also just wondering why, not that this is her fault, but why would she not have answered your question and said, "Yes, we are together. We live together." Why was she being vague?
Why would she lie at that point? I mean, if I was in the position and I wanted to really get back at someone, I would have been like, yes, we are, sorry.
The holidays are behind us, the decorations are packed away, and now we are in that January reset mode. You know, that mode where you're just trying to get your life back in order after all of the holiday chaos. Michael and I made a joint New Year's resolution this year to actually prioritize our sleep. So, no more phones in bed, no more doom scrolling right before we go to sleep. And one of the easiest ways to stick with that is with the Loftie clock. Lofty is a smart alarm clock that helps you wind down at night and then wake up in the morning without harsh screens in front of your face or loud, chaotic alarms. Instead, you get soothing sounds, calming lights, and tons of wellness content like meditations and sound baths. It's basically like having a mini spa retreat right on your nightstand. One feature we love is the two-phase alarm. It wakes you up gently, so there's just no more jumping out of your skin to those awful phone alarms. It's the total opposite experience. Plus, if you're using Lofty for your kids, the Magic Story Maker is so much fun. You can create personalized bedtime stories for them that use their names, their favorite stuffed animals, even little details from family vacations. It is such a sweet way to wind down together. So, if you want to start the year feeling refreshed instead of frazzled, head over to buylofty.com and use the code all caps RealStuff20 to get 20% off orders over $125. Again, that's all caps code RealStuff20 at buylofty.com for $20 off orders over $125. Terms apply, and this offer excludes bundle packages. So she comes out. She's banging on the window. At some point, you realize this is the girl. And then she fake falls,
Yeah, fake balls.
but he checks on her. She's okay. So then what?
He gets back in the car And as he's getting in the car and he's like pretty much pulling out, of course, she's like sprinting over to her car. And so I don't even know. This is now like probably very much close to Chicago. If not, we're in Chicago at this point. So we're in like the one-way roads or just those smaller streets. You know, you don't have 3 lanes per street. It was just very easy for her to catch up to us. So she started driving after us when he pulled out. And it became her getting behind us. I'm sure it took a second, but she got behind us. And as we're driving and going a normal speed, she started like T-boning the car, not T-boning, excuse me, rear ending the car. So just trying to like nudge the car. And there were a couple lurches that we had to go through until I remember starting to freak out. And I learned, I think that was my primary panic attack I've ever had, was those moments when I realized like, wow, you know, we're really in a situation where like we're being lurched forward. She's damaging your car, though he had a much larger car than her. And I kind of knew what was coming. And so it became in almost an instant like a full car chase instead of just her being behind us and us in a little bit of traffic and she kept rear ending. He started going probably double the speed limit. So if we're like going 40 or 30, he's going 60, 80, whatever it is. He has doubled the speed limit. He is now zigzagging in between people, which going into oncoming traffic and back. And I can't remember if it was like a busy day, but I just was having a panic attack because I could not believe what we were in at that moment. And she was always behind us. And so at some point he was zigzagging, and then I think he was going to attempt to try and just like make a quick exit. And he drove into a school parking lot. Their gate was closed that we couldn't tell. And then because she's behind us, she came in hot and he was trying to turn around. So his car was already kind of turned and like parallel with the gate. She came in and immediately T-boned us. And because she was able to come in at full speed, that like got us like teetering over fully. And so I remember I was like crying, screaming, nearly throwing up at this point. And she just kept reversing. She couldn't do the full blast of a T-bone, but she kept reversing, coming back. And he was stuck. I think he would have had to jump a curb or hit something to get out. So he just wasn't really moving or going anywhere.
And which side was it?
It was on his side. So I was at least like facing the school gate now, but it was on his side.
And was he getting injured during this?
I have no clue. I feel bad that I can't even remember if he got really hurt, but I know it was probably the back seat. He was in one of those, gosh, I can't even think of the word, but it was just like a massive truck situation, and she was in a much smaller Cadillac. I remember her car very well. But other than that, I don't think that it was severe injury, but his car was very messed up. It from the back and the side, even the front. I don't know how that happened. But yeah, she was able to do that. What haunts me about this entire situation was there was Good Samaritan, just a kind heart, who ended up, of course, we were very much public with this. We weren't hidden. So someone came in behind her car, and I remember they were getting out, and all I could really see was just kind of a body that was getting out, probably yelling. I don't know what they were doing. And then nothing had happened, but she was forced to not be able to reverse anymore. Not really sure how my ex was able to finally get away, but he was able to just do some kind of maneuver as this person was outside of their car, and he was able to get away. And I remember looking back and seeing that she then reversed into that person's car, and I'm sure completely damaged it because she was like full force to where you can see that person's car moving. And I just felt so bad and at fault for the fact that someone was trying to help, and then here they are. You know what I mean? Their property's getting damaged. I'm hopeful that they weren't hurt, but I don't think so, because then she did try to drive out. I remember looking back and like yelling at him, telling him to go, go, go. And he ended up going into a neighborhood that was those one-way neighborhoods. And he was just zigzagging. Again, going way too fast, but zigzagging until we just couldn't be found at that point. And we were able to sit there for a couple minutes and just kind of, he kept telling me to breathe. That was like the end of it. Was I remember him telling me to breathe, and I realized like I was still very much having that panic attack.
Wow.
Yes, it was horrific. When I got home, I remember I was sobbing to my mom, but I wrote her, and what I did tell her was, you put my life in danger. Like, we could have gotten hurt. You could have killed somebody else. And I told her, like, don't you ever put my life in danger ever again. And I was really mean, and this is a harsh thing to say, but I told her, I will make sure that your daughter is not going to know her mother, but not in that way. I was telling her, like, you're going to be in prison. I'm going to put you in prison. I'm going to make sure. But that's how I phrased it. And so I'm thinking, like, I wonder what she thought that meant, because I did not mean it. But I did mean, like, honey, I will put you away. And so it was at the forefront of my mind that this person was putting us in danger. And then I did feel very guilty for years and to right now about the other person that got their property damaged.
Did you ever find out who that other person was?
Never, never. And I don't even, I think it was like shame and embarrassment that I don't know how I could have started finding out who it was, but I wonder, like if there was a way for me, social media or something, to find out who that was. We would have to report it probably to see if they could connect the dots.
So was this situation never reported?
Never.
Was it something you wanted to report?
Not necessarily. I think that was like the shame that I was even in that situation. I'm pretty sure like maybe my moms would have thought about that. I'm sure that was a conversation and like the first thing that they brought up, just knowing what they do. So I'm not really sure why it didn't end up being something, but I think it was mainly like my ex, and just like his involvement. And I don't really know. I can't decipher what the reason was. Yeah.
It's interesting to pull yourself out and to view the situation from a totally unbiased third party. Zooming back, there are so many layers to it. And I'm assuming when you hear the story being told by every different party, you can kind of empathize with everyone's
Hmm.
unique situation. One thing that struck me early on when you were telling me that she started texting you really egregious, mean things, I started thinking about how common it is in our society that when there's some sort of a fight over a man, I'm just talking
Hmm.
about heterosexual relationships, that the women go towards each other. The women villainize each other.
Hmm.
When really, this is the man's problem
It's
for
them.
getting caught in the middle of this
Yeah.
relationship. And oftentimes, women don't really know how to approach it with the man. So they think an
Mhm.
easier target is to go to the other woman and call her a bitch, or she's evil, or she's stealing my
Right.
man, or
Yeah.
she's wrecking my home, like turning everything towards the other woman. From her situation, I'm just trying to imagine being in a relationship with someone, having a kid with someone. I'm trying to raise my daughter with someone and he's out and I find out that he's with someone else and I don't really know much about them, but I now see that she's in my driveway and I've told her to stay away from our family,
Right.
but here she
Yeah.
is. Not that I think it's ever right to go chase someone in a car, put everyone's lives at risk and ram
Mhm.
into them, but I could see her anger
The
coming out
fury.
as
Yeah.
yeah, fury as a mother, as someone who has feelings for him,
Mhm.
and anger towards him, and the fact that you happen to be in the car during that is unfortunate. And then from your standpoint, it's like you meet this guy, you start dating, he's telling you he's got this other girl that he doesn't have any feelings for anymore, but he happens to have a daughter with her. And
Mhm.
as far as you're concerned, you're trying to establish a relationship, and next thing you know, you're being batted down and rammed into with a car. So it's like from all accounts, it's
It's
unfortunate
tough.
and it's easy to just point fingers and be like, that
Mhm.
one person is crazy or that person sucks. But I do like to put on the lens of being in their shoes and
Yeah.
trying to figure out what I would do. I'm not a very violent person, so I don't ever think I would chase someone or drive a car into someone, or
Right.
I'm
Yeah.
even not confrontational enough to send mean texts. However, it does give me pause to just look at the situation and
Consider it.
just say, that woman, evil. Because,
Mhm.
as a mom myself, I can't imagine how I would feel if the father of my daughter and a person that I loved was out and about with other people.
Exactly. Yeah.
Is that something you've sort of thought through?
Yeah, I'm really glad you brought that up because there was a time, even with my following relationship in college, after that relationship with this woman that was his best friend that I was very supportive of, I loved her. He ended up cheating with her. And my initial message to her was like so harmful and so like, how could you? Like, you're the reason why, da, 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 all these horrible things. And I finally got over whatever this ego thing that I had going on. I'm so grateful that there must have been like a quarter life crisis where I started to get away from that mindset and that thought process. Because at this current stage of my life, I could not imagine. And even though I am furious that this person put us in danger like that, I probably would have been like screaming in a voice note, because of the fury that you feel that someone else could be, what's the word? You're engaging with someone that is in a relationship or could be close to a relationship with someone, like someone is just like perpetuating the harm that you're experiencing as someone who's being cheated on. And so I do think about her a lot and my heart goes out to her. And I think a funny situation that I consider the cherry on top is that they're now married and they have another child. And I only found that out because he kept writing me like every year. It became every other year a couple years ago, and he just wrote me again. He tried to add me in Facebook couple weeks ago. And so I feel for her because what you said is so true. It is absolutely him. And even if she is deciding and still very much engaging with someone she knows has hurt her, I still think that she must be trying in a way that he is clearly not trying. And he must be lying to her in a way that he was lying to me and manipulating her in a way that he was manipulating me. And so it is very true. I don't like that it is an initial like woman against woman, especially in those, like you said, heterosexual relationships, when the problem sometimes is very much the partner that is shared between people. It is really hard.
It's also so unfortunate in the situation when children are involved because that just makes it
Yes.
so much harder for her to say, "Listen, you're not being loyal in this relationship. I'm out,"
You're gone. Yeah.
because this is the father of her kids, and I'm sure she wants them to have some sort of relationship.
Mhm.
If your email was correct, after this car chase incident, you continued to date this man for how long?
For pretty it was probably like month and a half, nearly 2 months.
Okay.
And dating is light because there still were like the biggest arguments that we had were during those last like month and a half, 2 months. We would still go see a movie and, go grab something to eat, but I was still like very angry with him. But 2 months of still like engaging with someone that this happened, I was so embarrassed after I was off of that situation, this that I kept going.
What do you think kept you there for 2 more months?
I One, it's like he must have played. I do think he did have a good character about him, but he still played a character very well. And it's just that he cared so deeply. Like he just cared for me so much and he was so apologetic, but he never really owned up to the fact that if you're living together, you probably have been on and off, or just are engaging in things and actions, to make her think that y'all are still very much together. I think it was just his character, his aura. I just still felt very loved. And yet we just got out of a car chase and I still felt loved. Like that doesn't really add up at all.
Is your takeaway from this situation that dating an older person, especially as a teen, is kind of always a problem?
So, yes, I guess when I wrote, there were unfortunately probably like 2 to 3 other relationships where I dated someone who was older. So after him, there was someone who was 31 when I was 18 that I dated. And that was a really quick turnaround, just like relationship, situationship. And then another person when I was 18, 19, who was 26, 27. And all of those ended in just a really negative way. And I also softened up. I wasn't so mean. I got a little bit better or a little bit more fair as a partner. And yet, there still was something that happened where I was at a complete disadvantage. And what I think is so funny, Lucy, is that I keep saying it's an ego thing, but I really do think it was. I still had this mindset that I can be in control, that I am so mature, because I was more mature at 16 up, to 18, but not mature enough. There's so much that you don't know. There are experiences you've never had. And for some reason, I kept telling myself, especially when the conversation would come up where people would say, be careful, I'd always say, what's there to be careful about? Like, I know what I'm doing. It's them who needs to be careful. Like I was always that way. And it really did take only a couple years ago for me to realize, wow, even when I thought that I was so far ahead of them, even just more mature than the people I was with, the 26-year-old, I was like, you could be 15 for all I know, like just how you act. It's interesting that there always was something that they were able to do that I wasn't aware they were doing because I'd never experienced it. I didn't know people were capable of doing X, Y, or Z, or that people would want to do X, Y, or Z. I didn't really know what manipulation looked like, especially when it came to like manipulating someone to engaging in like just intimacy too early in a relationship, or manipulating them to think that they had to continue intimacy outside of the relationship. Like once we broke up, you have to learn what people are able to do, what they are able to say to you, and how that can affect you. And so learning all of that, I really do think that a younger person is not able to be fully in control enough for it to be a fair exchange with an older person. And I really just say that when it comes to teenagers. When you get into the early 20s, it still can be really tough if you're 20 with someone who's 45. Like that can be really tough. But when it comes to a teenager specifically, I will always say that they're at a huge disadvantage. And it is almost always something that can be harmful, even if nothing crazy happens to them.
To the point of you having a string of relationships with
Mhm.
older than you men,
Yes. Yeah.
can we discuss and dive into you having 2 moms, do you have any father figures in your life?
Definitely my grandpa. My grandpa and I have incredible, like, uncles, and I still had a relationship with my father, but it wasn't like a buddy-buddy relationship. So, there were good men around.
Are you comfortable diving into you having 2 moms?
Yeah, they met when I was must have been I'm gonna get this number wrong, I know, but probably like 9 years old. We lived in Washington State. So they met and fell in love, and they didn't tell me they were together immediately, but we were a family, and we ended up moving to Texas together, and that's when they told me.
Were your mom and dad previously together?
Yes. They were both Army, and then they ended up marrying and then divorcing when I was around 3. So that was something where I still heard from him sporadically, but that was the problem at hand, was that I didn't feel like we had like a strong relationship, me and him. So I wasn't as close with him.
So some people talk about when there's not a strong father figure in someone's life, the relationship's gravitating towards older men.
Yeah,
I
for
believe the
sure.
term is daddy issues.
Yeah, I was to say exactly.
Is that something that you feel like is relevant in this conversation at all?
I will never say it's not, and a part of me wants to say that it wasn't daddy issues because I was able to get out a lot of my anger and fury towards my father. Unfortunately for him, he had to go through that stage with me. And I feel like it can be really hurtful for a lot of people when they're not able to really release a lot of the anger and tension and hurt to the person or the parent that hurt them. So I feel like I got enough of that out to where there wasn't anything that was like unresolved, but I still think there is. Like psychologically, there has to have been for sure, especially dating older and significantly older. I wasn't 16 dating a 20-year-old. Like these are people that were much, much older.
And I do find it interesting that all of these relationships, or at least the first one, seemed to have some elements of you bringing that anger or
Yeah.
aggressiveness
Yeah.
to the partner. And I just wonder if there's any parallels with wanting to take control and wanting to have power over this person almost in a way that you wish you had with your dad.
Quite possibly. Absolutely. Or I guess my problem with father is just not being believed, not being heard. But in the terms of control, I do think that is absolutely a part of it. Just really needing, or even just not wanting to be played. I think it's just for someone to be able to get away with something, which is what I would always kind of speak about my father. Is like, I feel like you were able to get away with a lot of like not doing a lot. So I don't like that. And that could have very much been the reason why I didn't want those relationships to like get away with anything when it came to being with me.
If you had a child now and they came to you as a teen and said,
Mhm.
I'm getting into this relationship, and you kind of knew all the details, forget the marijuana felony, but like
Mhm.
they have a daughter, they have another woman who's somewhere.
Right. Yeah.
Would you advise them against it?
Gosh, that is a great question. I think it's so funny you've asked things that I'm like, I've never thought about that. I actually really appreciate my moms for how they were because they work in what can be a very dangerous field, and they know good and well just all of the like the ins and outs of people and their ability to do things you never think they could do kind of stuff. And so you would think that I'd be like terrified, right? Or they'd want to like instill fear in me, but they weren't trying to do that. And I think I'd want to do the same. Like I think I'd want to make sure I gave my situation and my like story in a way to not instill fear in them, but to make sure they knew like this, you're not playing around when you're with this person. And I would actually probably lean against my own opinion that like there could be a huge disadvantage, and actually telling my child that, and just kind of seeing how they feel about that, maybe have some boundaries that they have to have with that person. But I don't know if I would say that they can't at all. So that's a really tough like thing to consider and think over.
At the time, did you tell any of your friends about this relationship and give them all the background? And if so, what did they think of all this?
So it was something that I definitely kept to myself. I did share what I was with the person I was with when I went away to college. Like he was older, and I was able to tell people. But when it came to the high school situation, I told the person closest to me, who's like my sister. I always called her my platonic soulmate. So she did know everything. But when I think about it, I don't think she knew like the depth of our relationship. And so I know that I at least told her, and I think that I told her about like his record and all of these things, but I still don't think that I was giving her all the detail or just being forthcoming with it. And that was to probably hide it for sure.
Obviously, I don't want to make a sweeping statement about
Yeah.
every relationship that has a huge age gap or even every relationship where the younger person is a teen,
Hmm.
as long as it's legal. But
Right.
do you feel like, I guess specifically if we're talking about heterosexual relationships where the younger person is a teen girl and the
Hmm.
older person is a man, do you feel like there's some common thread in these men that seek out younger women? And what is it that loops them all together? Is it them wanting to be with someone that they feel like they're in control of? Is it them just being attracted to youth and wanting someone who's young and hot?
Hmm.
Do you
Yeah.
think that there's, like, always a layer of manipulation and control involved?
Yeah, I do. I think my word that I use is innocence. I think that there is like an appreciation that I won't say all, right? Because you really can't. But I will say, especially when I got to college, there was like always the term the fresh meat, or just the fact that like my first boyfriend in college had asked, "Have you even been with anybody yet?" Like things like that, that you're like, why do you care? I think there was a desire for innocence and a desire for someone that I don't know if it's a full blown like insidious, they want to control someone, but I do think there can be something just like really nice about feeling like you can mold someone or feeling like I kind of mentioned, I didn't really know what to look out for. I actually didn't know what it looked like when someone is like secretly, you know what I mean, trying to be manipulative or whatever. There were just certain behaviors I did not know what they looked like until they happened. And maybe that's helpful for older men who get with younger girls because they don't yet know what to see as a red flag.
I agree with what you're saying about
Hmm.
them feeling like there's something nice about molding someone, but I can't help but feel like they all might have some other area of their life that they feel very out of control with, and they feel like they need their relationship to be one area that they feel this real sense of stability and like they're the king and they are the person who is being worshipped and
Hmm.
listened to, and not that it's always insidious, like, "I'm going to tie you down and control you,"
Right. Yeah.
but definitely something psychological going on there.
For sure. Yeah. And I think a part of me is always trying to keep it very like nice and you know what I mean? Like with a bow on it whenever I say those things, but I completely agree. And it makes me cringe a little bit because I do feel that it is a control problem. It is an obsession with innocence, all of the things. It's scary.
You've mentioned a few times now the shame that you feel around
Yeah.
so many aspects of the situation, from the innocent bystander that maybe got hurt,
Mhm.
or just the fact that you didn't know better going into this relationship. How do you feel now, 10 years later, telling the story publicly on a podcast? Do you feel like this is healing for you? Do you feel any sense of worry that someone from your past might listen to this? Do you want people from your past to listen to this? Are
Yeah.
you gonna share this when it comes out? What's going on there?
Right. So, yeah, I think it's funny because 'cause I'm like, poor mom, like, to have her relive it, it's like, I'm gonna act like we didn't film this so she doesn't have to listen kinda thing, but I will. Like, I am so glad for the opportunity to share it because if people do hear it, I think it can maybe offer a moment of pause for people, and even people who are in these relationships or someone who hasn't really thought about it. If they had a family member who was in like an age gap situation, I feel like there's just a lot of things that can happen to someone when they're younger and they can be changed in a way that doesn't have to be this like horrific change or just like stunting their growth emotionally, physically, whatever. But I think it can have a huge impact. So the shame is it was there a couple years ago, just leading all the way up until a little bit right now, but not enough for me to not want to share the story and like make sure people know it. And people do. Like I started talking more about it, especially after dating in college, just because I still feel like no car chase, but it's still with like similar situations in college with older people. And I really want to save people from that. And it's random, but another thing that I think really affected me is that I haven't even really dated since all of that. So the last time I dated was when I was 20 years old. And a part of me wants people to understand that although I can't yet define, my therapist and I are working on it, but I can't yet define why that is. I think there was a huge part of all of that when I was literally 17 to 21 that caused me to like not want to engage in dating.
Yeah, wow, that totally took the next
Yeah.
question out of my mouth, which was, A, are you in a relationship now?
Yeah,
And
right.
B, I was gonna ask how this whole situation affected your mental health.
It was tough. I always I'm okay sharing that I went through like the darkest part of my or period of my life when I was a junior in college, and I was so thankful to get out of that. And so junior and senior year were really tough, but I'm so glad I graduated still. It was easy for me to say, okay, no dating, when you're trying to graduate, because that was my priority. And then when I'm a new graduate, my priority was getting a job and just like starting my life. And so I said I can hold off on dating. And then a couple years ago, when I'm turning like 25, I'm like, okay, I have the big girl job and I'm getting my health back in order. I feel okay. Dating might be good. And now I'm 28 years old and I still have made excuses. And again, I can't really define those exact excuses, but I do think it is just like knowing what people are capable of. And I don't want to be involved in having to rediscover what other things people are capable of. Like that's something that's like mentally in the back of my mind. So I'm open to it though. I think that's a good thing is that I'm not jaded, although it's a harsh word. I'm not in a place where I don't appreciate men. I'm not in a place where I'm afraid of men. I'm not in a place where I don't think love exists. I actually am like a lover girl at heart, but there is definitely something holding me back.
Well, I think it's great that you are working through it all in therapy and, having these conversations because hopefully when you do feel inclined and interested in entering the dating scene, you'll be coming at it from a much healthier place. I just feel like the energy that you bring into the seeking process winds up really reflecting who you end up getting on the other side.
Yes, exactly.
Is there any part of you that wants the man and the woman who are involved in this to listen to this podcast episode?
I would love him to listen to it. I'd love to see a message pop up in my phone like, what are you doing? What was this? Um,
Why is that?
but I honestly just want him to hear like what he's doing. I don't really know, especially now that he has married her. Like I actually wouldn't want. It's funny. I wouldn't even want her to hear this because like why would I want to re-traumatize someone? But I would want him to because I feel like for some people this may be a harsh statement, but I sometimes feel like embarrassment can be a really good teacher for some people. And I just wonder if he would feel that. But what is hilarious is that some people are not affected at all by embarrassment or not affected at all by feeling outed or anything like that. But a part of me kind of hopes, like maybe when you hear all of this, you're thinking to yourself, like, what am I doing? And maybe that could be some kind of teacher. So yeah, I'd love it. That would bring me joy.
That does make me feel like you maybe hold a touch of, I don't know if it's resentment or
Yeah.
there's like a little twinge of revenge that you want to get just to maybe have the last word in all of this.
I think that's fair. I think that's fair. And I also am able to completely forget about him and am able to still like say kind things about him. So I know that there is definitely resentment because I feel like there was a really good chunk of my youth that I could have spent elsewhere. But at the same time, I still engaged in things. I made those choices too. I guess knowing that I'm having to like own up to my choices, own up to all of my mistakes and feel my embarrassment. I guess that's more of it. Like I just want him to feel the same. Like he has to own up to this now.
Well, Makayla, thank you so much for coming on and being
Thank
so
you.
open. I know our audience is going to love this episode and feel so grateful that you shared so openly, such a vulnerable, raw, traumatizing story. I hope that this was healing for you to
It
share the story.
was. Yes, it
I
really
hope that
was.
once this comes out and you're able to share it, that it also just adds to your inner sense of, that's in the past. We're moving on. We're in a better place. And I love your message of just trying to use it as a teaching experience, not just for him, but I think for young women,
Mhm.
teens. It's important for people to listen to and just remember that you're young and
Yeah.
you have your
To
whole life
think
ahead of
deeper
you.
before they get into it. Yeah.
So thank you so much for coming on. I
Thank
really appreciate
you.
you opening up.
No, this was amazing. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for tuning in to The Real Stuff. I'm Lucie Fink. Don't forget to follow the show on social media at The Real Stuff Pod. And if you're liking these episodes, please head over to Apple Podcasts and leave us a written review. It helps the show so much. And if you're feeling called to come on the show, visit luciefink.com/apply and tell us your story. We'll see you next week for another intimate conversation on The Real Stuff.